We see ISIL, a brutal, vicious death cult that, in the name of religion, carries out unspeakable acts of barbarism.
Let there be no doubt, we still do not have a viable strategy to counter ISIL, and if you're not winning in war, you are losing.
President Obama denouncing ISIS this week, while Senator John McCain says the White House still doesn't have a plan to beat them. And it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, Bob Woodward from the Washington Post, radio talk show host Laura Ingraham, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Bob, you wrote a book about Obama's war. How do you explain this week his talking in his national security strategy about strategic patience and comparing what we're doing to the Crusades 1,000 years ago? What do you make of those kind of comments at a time when the war against ISIS seems to have, if anything, only become more urgent?
If you talk to people in the White House and the military, I think there's agreement, and John McCain's right, and General Flynn is right. There's no strategy. They have not sat down and said, this is where we want to go, and this is how we want to do it. And the measure of that, when you get in the weeds here, people from the White House are micromanaging the tactical situation on a daily and weekly basis. That's not their job. They have to kind of do strategic planning and say, what do we want to accomplish in the next year?
Wait a minute, are you saying that, forgive me, Susan Rice is telling the generals what to do?
And they've got all these people in the White House. You talk to people in the military who are there, and they say, we are being micromanaged, and we're not given a real plan to say, what are we going to do here? And it's not the way to run a war or try to win a war. Now, in fairness, this is a very difficult, ugly situation. And what they need is a George Kennan, who was the one who came up with containment to deal with the Soviet Union, which worked on a bipartisan basis, Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, saying we're going to contain the Soviet Union, and there were elements that worked with people. You talk to the working level people, and they say, where are we going?
Karl, just on an issue of leadership, I very much doubt that during the London Blitz that Winston Churchill would have somehow tried to put what the Nazis were doing in historical context with what the Anglo-Saxons had done 1,000 years before.
Yeah, appalling lack of leadership. But look, there's an even bigger problem. If you read this national strategy document, there are two fundamental errors. One is a belief that wishing something to be true will make it so. The president is clearly intent upon disabusing us of the notion that ISIL and other groups like it represent an existential threat to the United States or the world order, as he told Fareed Zakaria last weekend in his interview. But ISIL, if it achieves its goal of a caliphate in the Middle East fueled by oil riches, will be a threat to the world order. Similarly, if the Taliban reestablishes control over Afghanistan and again becomes a sanctuary for terrorists, it will become a threat to the world order. The second problem is that they declare their failures as successes in order to repeat them. The president withdrew troops from Iraq, leaving behind no residual force as the Iraqis wanted, and as a result, he's not able to even undertake the three critical capabilities that his own strategy says are essential to success, namely targeted counterterrorism, collective action with responsible partners, and stopping the growth of these kind of terrorist organizations.
Laura, you know, I can't emphasize how important the interview we just had was. Here's Mike Flynn, one of the nation's top military intelligence people for a quarter of a century. And I got to tell you, not a partisan guy. He did not want to come on to go after Obama. And yet, when I asked him direct questions, because he's a straight shooter, he said, we don't have a strategy to defeat not just ISIS, but this whole, and he believes that we don't even identify what the problem is, this growing virulent form of Islamic extremism.
Well, anyone with a pulse or any brainwave knows there's no strategy. It's clear. But we know the president is capable of putting together a strategy for the things he really cares about. Free community college, immigration amnesty. He knows how to produce the strategy. He knows how to sell the strategy. He knows how to engineer a great moment in the Oval Office with the Dreamers, and it's very emotional. So he does know how to make the case to the American people on the issues he cares about, Chris. But I think on this issue, it's just one other problem of many problems. And Carl is right. That comment he made at the big prayer breakfast speech, when he said, "Get off, we have to get off our high horse," I found that to be so patently offensive. A high horse, we have a man burned to death. We have all these children being buried alive. We have Christians being tortured and brutalized throughout Africa and now in the Middle East. And we're on our high horse? I found that to be one of the most appalling statements of a modern-day president at a time of great crisis.
Juan, you're shaking your head, but wait a minute. I mean, is the president's desire to keep his campaign promises, is his tremendous, obviously, he wants to be the president whose legacy is that he got us out of war. Is that getting in the way of his ability to confront the reality that he faces right now?
Well, let's look at this as the president as leader for just a second. I don't want to have my brainwaves questioned this morning. But the president represents the American people, Chris. The American people are not calling for more war after two wars that drained our economy, strained our military. Let's look at it in terms of his role as commander-in-chief. We've had 6 months of airstrikes, strategic airstrikes on ISIS. 6 months, 90% of them by the United States of America. I don't see our Western allies seeing some reality that he's not seeing. They're not in the fight. I don't see our Arab allies, those Muslim countries right there who are directly threatened. I don't see them picking up the pace.
Well, you do see Jordan now doing that.
No, now 90% by the American military. So I don't see why we would blame America and the American president instead of looking farther. And secondly, even the far right in saying, you know, where's the strategy? They're not calling for putting troops on the ground. They always say, oh no, we're not saying put troops on the ground, because they know the American people don't want troops on the ground.
All right, Carl, last word.
Well, the American people would support action if the president enunciated the necessity for that action. Juan makes reference to the U.S. airstrikes. That tempo of 700 roughly airstrikes is what was normally done within a day or two. And why are the Arabs not stepping up to the line? Because they think that this president is feckless and weak. Why did the United Arab Emirates pull back initially? Because the President of the United States would not provide the essential support to pick those pilots up if they got shot down. We need strong American leadership. The American people will follow if the president enunciates what's at stake, and so will our allies, but none of them are going to get out there in front of us, except maybe the Jordanians, because they do not want to get out of front and be cut out from underneath, as this president has time and time done again to our allies.
This is a blame game, and you can do alarmism, and you can say it's instantaneous and urgent. We got to do this right now.
Can I just say one thing, because we have to cut off? Sometimes it's worth getting alarmed. And
well, but I'm saying,
and when they're killing hostages, cutting their heads off, burning them alive.
But that's not to say there's a direct threat to the United States like 9/11.
Time to hear the alarm. All right, we have to take a break here.